is Jes'ka Washington. I'm here with another Tea Talks, and today we're going to really talk about some breakdowns in the word employment, and really getting to look at what does a contract look like, maybe some important questions or definitions for you to know. Well, once again, as I said, I'm your host, Jes'ka Washington. I am here with Mr.
Heath Bailey, the principal of Vernon International School.
And congratulations on that move. And also we're here with
Nzinga Ebron from Brooklyn, New York. I'm an education consultant.
And I'm just very, very excited that you guys are here today. And I am going to speak one time just to say for the clear is that we are talking really in our opinions and the information that we personally know. One of the key things to know is that if you're really talking about employment within the UAE, you really have to look at your contract. It's a black and white, and it really deals with that. So one school might have, let's talk about probationary periods. One school might have a 30-day probationary period. Another school might have a 6-month probationary period. The way that they are administrated are the same, but it doesn't necessarily mean like the time length. So one of the key things to do is if you're talking about employment, you ask questions, right?
Many questions.
And take nothing for granted. I think that's a mistake a lot of people do, is that they assume the school is going to do everything in their best interest.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to remember it's a business, and their job is to get as much as they can from you. And so just make sure you read, like you would any other contract.
Mm-hmm.
This is no different. Read the fine print, make sure you understand your questions, ask questions before you sign anything. Just make sure everything is transparent for you, because it is their job to make money. Understand that, and that's very different from working in the States, right? When our job is to take care of students, right? That's our priority, but it's a business here.
Well, let's start with that piece. We're all from the States, and so I think one thing is that there's a couple of things. One is that in the States, most times when you're offered a job, the salary you're offered is based upon a stipend level, based upon your years and your degrees. Is that the same here, or is that different?
I would say it's probably different.
Okay.
Because sometimes it depends on between public and private, right?
Yep.
And then there's the market, depending on what emirate you're in, size of school, phase level, or secondary, elementary or high, number of students.
There's so many. So it goes back to what Nzinga said. It's a business.
Right.
And so in receiving salary, there are some schools that do work on a step-by-step that if you're at this level, you'll get this. There are some schools who are going to treat it as a negotiation, which is just a regular business contract. So once again, you have to be able to know your school and the market.
Know the market,
Yeah, and that's what I wanted to point out too, is maybe on the public side, there's probably some things that you can't negotiate. But on the private side, I would encourage you to look at flights, insurance, upgraded insurance, housing, things like that. You can definitely negotiate. Even if they're firm on the salary, you can negotiate those other things because they're private and they're flexible, more flexible than we even think sometimes.
Okay. Well, let's talk about salary for a second. And I'm going to say this right now. We are not going to talk about numbers. That is not our expertise. That is not our knowledge. But we are going to talk about, there's a little piece in the salary that I first saw and I had a heart attack, and it was like your base salary is this amount. And then they piled a lot on that. Does anybody break down what your base salary is?
Yeah, your base salary sometimes, and this is just in my opinion, once again, it's determined on what they want to pay you at the end during your, end of service.
End of service.
Right. So I think sometimes they go low with that.
Yes.
And they give you your salary and you're thinking, okay, you make this much, but your end of service is going to be definitely lower than if you don't, negotiate a higher base.
Yeah, your base salary is just the minimum they can pay you.
Right.
And then in addition to your base salary, depending on your education, expertise, and sometimes even your passport color, they add incentives. And the incentives is the salary they present to you. But at the end of the day, they can always revert to the base salary, depending on the circumstance. So just keep that in mind, because the base salary could be what they pay you.
Correct.
That would be what they decide.
And I want to say once again, when you talk about base salary, it's a question to go back. That if you're in a situation where you're in a negotiation and they're talking about end of service, then you're going to ask, how is my end of service calculated?
Yeah.
Is it off my take-home pay, or will it be off of my base pay? And that's just one of those things you need to know. And I will sit here and say as well, is not that somebody's might be unfair to you. It might just be the way of their school. So you have to understand the practice and the expectation. So I'm really liking that we kind of broke that down, right?
Yeah.
And so let's talk about the fact that you finally get, you know.
Well, real quick, I want to add one more thing before we transition. It's probably best, and I've done this just recently, is when you get that offer letter and you get that the stipulations and everything, look at the labor laws.
Right.
You know, try to see what aligns it, because sometimes, as you said, sometimes some of the things in there can be illegal. You know, so it's definitely best.
Well, I was actually going to go to the offer letter. And so that's the very first thing. You will receive an offer letter. And I think a lot of people recognize or think that once you sign the offer letter, that is your contract, that your contract starts then.
No, it's just the thing they offer you to get you. It's an incentive to say, okay, this is what we're trying to offer you. But it's not until you get that Ministry of Labor contract that is tied to a visa that says you're a resident and you work here. That is the binding contract, and you want to make sure that your offer letter that you accept matches your contract, because they can promise you things in your offer letter and you glaze over the contract thinking it's going to be the same, and then when issues arise, you're thinking, I was entitled to some things, I'm not seeing them, what's the problem? And it's because the contract you signed with the Ministry of Labor, which is the only one that's binding.
Yes.
Your offer letter is not, even though you sign it and they have you date and all of that, it's not a binding document. It could really, just make sure you pay attention to that.
And also keep your pen moving during the interview, because many times they'll say things that they're going to offer you, and then when you get the offer letter, it's not in that. So let alone the actual contract, but even in the offer letter, some of the things that were discussed in the interview aren't in it.
And I will say this before, do not take the assumption away from this that it's bad practices. You're dealing with a English, language barriers. You're dealing with people who are busy, who might forget, but it is the responsibility of the person who is signing to ensure that the things that you talked about are part of that process. And so that's one of the things that is important. And then I would like to say that in our terms, what we look at as an offer letter is probably just a promissory letter. And if you look at it in that expectation, because off of the offer letter, yes, you can expect for your flight to be coming over. Yes, it does bind you to that school unless it brings back something. So it is a promissory letter. But once again, and you brought up something, that the actual contract, if you're signing a 2-year contract, the date of that contract starts the date that you receive your visa.
Yes.
So it is all binding on once you receive your visa. And then once you receive your visa, we're all clear with the contract, right?
Exactly.
Not quite.
Probationary period.
Oh.
Yes.
Yeah, you're right.
So after you receive your contract from the Shannon, we want to talk a lot about this, because this is important.
Yes.
That is your time to really, it's like a relationship. The first 90 days, you want to learn all that you can about that organization.
Or 6 months.
Right.
You need to know, and I'll say that first, you need to know your probationary period. Because it can be 30 days, it can be 90 days, and it can be 6 months. And once again, that's in the contract, and that's based upon each school's practices. I've seen all 3. So, but the probationary period is important because I interrupted, so.
Well, it's important because it gives you an opportunity to make sure you're covered and you're protected. And so if you get to a place, you sign a contract, you're in a binding relationship, but you realize it's not a good fit, you have that probationary period to decide that you want to move on. It also means that the school has the option to sever your relationship if they feel like it's not a good fit. And so that time is really important. And I know for me personally, I took it as, let me just relax and learn about my new country. But no, you need to learn about this school. How do they handle conflicts? Are they really taking care of you in the way that they say they will? Are they, do you see an imbalance in the way they treat their teachers? Because once that contract is binding, after that probationary period, you are there until the end of that contract.
Yes. So that's one thing that, and I'll let you go in a second, is that once again, your probationary period is the only time that you're able to leave free and clear in that situation. Basically, if something's happening, I'm not feeling comfortable, I don't think this is the fit for me, I can turn around and say, within a probationary period, I choose to leave, and there's not a repercussion regarding like you owe or you're fined or you're this. You will lose probably your housing, you will lose those things as that you're breaking your work contract with people, but you're in a situation where you still can leave.
No, I was just going to add, she said it mostly, but you learn the politics of the governing board and everything, you know, even try to get as much information as about how the finances are working, you know, or people getting paid on time and things like that. That could be very stressful. So during that probationary period, find out, are they stable financially?
So. And so then from there, all right, after the probationary period, and I'm gonna tell you, I knew the date of mine in one of my jobs because I was looking at him like, hey boo, you know, it's like that relationship. Hey, you ain't tipped the waitress, you know, you ain't opening doors. I don't know, just being you, but because, and I'll say even in that case, I stayed, and so you now have to really pay attention to your contract. Because it's not a situation where you can just easily leave. And I say that because it's all about the fine print. And at this point in time, if you find yourself in a situation, you should call the Department of Labor. Because the Department of Labor, or the Ministry of Labor in our case, is the ones that can tell you the black and white of exactly what should happen. And they have your contract on file with your name, with your Emirates ID number, and they're going to sit here and say exactly what is what. And one of the key things is that if you choose to quit, if you choose to break your contract, the school has the right to decide if they want to ban you from work in here, and I don't know how long the ban is. Is it 2 years?
About a year.
It's about a year. The school has the right to decide to fine you, and the fine is usually your pay 2 months. Right?
Well, their objective is to recoup costs.
That's what it is.
So any cost that they've expended to get you here, to house you, you have to pay that back. And that's like the worst feeling. Because they're supposed to be paying you and you have to give them money. But they're essentially just trying to recoup. So in the contract, it might say 45 days. It really the contract tells you what your penalty will be.
No, I've seen that happen. I forgot about that.
I mean, I was in a situation where I paid out my contract, but it was a choice. It was an absolute choice that I made, that I said, you know what, I can't do this. And I went to them and I said, I understand that there's a penalty. Let's talk about the penalty. And I paid out my penalty because it was just honestly a better situation. But that goes from the research, that goes from me knowing. And so I calculated my money and did all those things and was able to leave on an amicable basis as long as I took care of that. But you have to recognize that that's there. While that sounds scary and people are like, oh my gosh, recognize it's the same on the opposite end. If the school lets you go before your contract period, they owe. They have to pay a certain amount, and it's in the contract. So the thing is, it is a fair-based contract. It just has to be really read. So
it's there to protect. It's there to protect both parties. It's there to protect the teachers as well as the business that's there.
And then
no, that's a great point.
And then I will say it also depends on the relationship you have with the business, because there are people who have said, hey, I want to break this contract. I have a different position available for me. I can really grow. And if they have a great relationship, the company is like, that's fine. That's no problem. There's nothing there. So it's really about the relationship. Even regarding the ban portion, I have not seen that enforced at all, even though they have the right. So it's one of those things where you have to make sure that you have the relationship. And a lot of times people will leave, I would say amicably, but you have to make sure you know the expectations.
I haven't seen it enforced.
Well, it's very expensive to do. It's not something that they can do freely on purpose. So they have to pay a considerable amount to ban someone. So most organizations just say, you leave, freely, we'll find someone else. It is. You only do that if you fear like the employer is going to be on your visa and do something illegal. That would be their fear. But if they don't care about that, then they usually don't.
Well, you actually brought up a really good point, and I think that's one reason why the rules are as stringent as they are. And if you're new to the international world, or you're new to understanding, it is the visa. And the thing is that when you say a company sponsors your visa, the employer, your school, is responsible for everything that happens to you on your visa. So a lot of the reasons why some of these rules are stringent is because they are responsible for sponsoring you. That's what a visa is, and it means that anything that happens in the country can potentially go back to them. And that's one reason why the rules are the way that they are. So, for example, if you pull out a loan and then you leave, it is the employer who's then responsible for those things. So that's one reason why the visa and the exchange of the visa is so critical and is so crucial. There's very rarely a chance where an employer will sponsor your visa and be like, okay, you can just stay, because it puts them in a very bad situation.
It's a liability. Everything you do in this country is tied to your visa, from the car you drive to your bank account, to where you live, to your phone
Everything.
your internet
Everything.
Everything is tied to your visa, and because they're your sponsor, if you default on anything, then they're liable. And at them, I mean, as a business, you wouldn't want that just to be out there. So the ban, what it does is says we've severed relationship with this person. If they do anything at this point, it's not on us.
Yeah, and even in your end of service, there's a stamp. And it's in the computer. It's its final settlement.
Right.
Yeah. So.
And so it goes back to, and I know we say research, but you do. And you have to understand that each emirate can operate differently. A lot of people say, oh, you teach in Dubai, so what is it like in Kuwait? I have no clue, because everybody has their own set of rules. It's like when you went to grandma's house and you can't touch the sofa, but then when you went over to Medea's house, her sofa been around for the last 35 years. You know, Uncle Mike sleeping on it. And then you go
no plastic.
Right, and then you going over to your auntie's house, and depending on if it's your bougie auntie or your auntie with 17 kids, the rules are different. You're still the same person. You still whatever, but it's all about whose house you in at what time. So you got to learn the rules of the house. So
that's true. Yeah.
Well, so that's just a little bit. We talked about it, and so is there anything else that you feel like we just kind of need to add in? Because the whole point of us talking about this is saying you have to have the conversation.
Yeah, I would say if they've pulled your, and I'm just from a person who's currently looking and.
Years in the game.
Well, just trying to, But I always walk into those spaces, those interviews, those meetings, knowing that they pulled my CV. So don't go into you have some type of capital, some type of. Don't be afraid to ask for more, and even if the salary's not there, the what is it called? The benefits.
The benefits, your insurance.
Insurance. You can get those in negotiations.
Yeah, and it's also important to remember, even after you sign your contract and you're working there, that your contract is really your guide. And so if there's anything that I know sometimes it feels adversarial to bring up your contract and awkward, but that is really important that they adhere to the things they said they're going to do. So if you don't have health care and it's in your contract, that's important.
Well, I think that too, to negotiate a contract, so it's foreign land for us. It's kind of like, what is this like? And then what you said too, I'm going to push back a little bit, because you're like, don't be afraid to ask for more. Also know what you're worth. And
where the market is too.
And ask where the market is, because especially if you're looking at private schools, you might not be in a situation where you're thinking you're coming in on Rick Ross' budget. They might be independent and coming in. And so most places will sit there and try to tell you, and then that's why it's important to know other people to do these things. I got an offer and I felt it was low, but once I reached out to people, they're like, no, the cost of living is low. So it really wasn't low. So you have to be able to do that research, and you have to know what your numbers are. And we're going to have another episode when we talk about money, but when you talk about salary, it's not your school's job to take care of your bills back home.
That's true.
You have to know your numbers. You have to know what you can do, and you have to know if you can make it happen, because your school is going to abide by what the contract is.
Right.
and that's it. And pay increases are sometimes few and far between, so I guess you'll talk about that in the money episode.
I mean, and the money episode is more about the budgeting and stuff. But when we talk about pay increases, it's once again, it's a business. Each school will operate the way that they feel like they need to, and you have to understand that they need you to offer something. They need you to be able to provide a service. You have to bring value to it,
Right.
and so they are looking at your contract as, are we getting what we're paying for?
Right.
Especially if, and you know, this is one of those taboo things, but not all teachers are ranked and rated and paid the same. So if they're going to pay top tier for a teacher, they want to get top tier value.
Exactly.
Right. And I mean, sometimes a contract can be some sort of litmus test on the climate of the school before you get there. Because some companies or the schools will send you a contract, and from the first moment, you're like, this is not measuring my value. This is not equal to my value. And it allows you to see, just to get a glimpse into, okay, so they don't value experience, they don't value expertise, they don't value, and that is important because you will see that play out in the culture of the school. So use that as a way to even decide whether you want to go forward with that relationship.
How do you handle the what's your salary expectation?
I hate that question. Oh my God.
Well,
How do you handle
I read something that said, don't answer the question because that is them trying to tell you to give them a number, which is inappropriate. You actually have to say, well, this is the range. What is your range that you're offering teachers with this years of experience, this level of, this is the value I bring. You tell me.
What is the value of a person that has these expertise?
Right, and that's exactly my response. I say, you know, market value, and I also have to put in, and I want a fair wage, livable wage. You know what I mean? Like, let's not lowball me and then us go back and forth.
So. Well, that was smart because I had not done my research and went on mine, and they were like, whoa! And they'll give you a hit. They'd be like, are you talking about US? What are you talking about? And it was kind of like, so I will say that is a testy question. I will say that reach out to people, and a lot of times in the groups that I'm getting, I'll see a random, hey, what's the salary like out there? And then you give the range, and then you sit there and say, and I think that's one of the things I'm willing to renegotiate if I find out that this is not a fair wage, like, or why did you base it this way, and what do I bring to the table, and what is this worth? But it's a hard question. I'm not going to sit here and say even going for appointment, it's not, it's not, I don't think it's an easy ball game. I think it's...
it's like buying a car sometimes. They keep coming back with a different, you know, talk to my manager and they come back and they give you another one and you give them another one. So it's negotiation, but how about base salary?
What do you mean, Garden?
Increasing the base salary instead of increasing the entire salary.
Well, I'll say that once again, you got time out here. I'm about 2 years here. So I didn't learn the base salary game until recently. And then I'm just going to sit here and say, for me, I feel like I'm in a very fair situation. And I really, really appreciate it because that's when I started learning other people and I was like, oh, this is that, and oh, this is that. And so yes, you can. One of the things that you might look at is negotiating, even if it's the same number, to say I want a higher base salary and lower stipends. Like I said, because these are the things that you're learning and doing to say, hey, I want these things that are possible.
What do we call that? Back end money, right? You know, it's funny. I was reading about the Black Panther movie. You know, maybe it went billions and trillions, and everybody watched it. The actors, they didn't get the back end money. They got the front end. They got the one-time down payment.
It's a very beautiful story, and we have to close out. But I think if you can find Jason Weaver, is that Jason Weaver's mother said, we don't want to get paid for Lion King, and he was the first young Simba. She said, we want stock. And he is like, to this day, he's like, this house is paid from the Lion King cartoon.
From 20 years ago.
Because she was like, no, we'll take a lower amount and just give us base, and then we take the stock. So you just have to kind of learn that game. But at this point in time, I want to say thank you so much for your expertise and time, and thank you so much for your expertise and time, and thank you for joining in. Once again, you can post comments in the questions. We're also going to post a link to Loretta Sanders'
Yes, shout out
article.
to Loretta. Yeah.
She actually did a great one just talking about the beginnings and the understandings. Don't take this as an opportunity to be afraid. Take it as just an opportunity to constantly learn and be educated on this new world that's out here. But thank you so much for tuning in. Once again, this is Jes'ka Washington with Tea Talks.